What happened to the Byrds?
The Byrds Corps was founded in early 1964 when Jim McGuinn, Gene Clark, and David Crosby formed a trio. Each of the three artists had a folk music experience, having worked as a folk singer on the acoustic coffeehouse circuit in the early 1960s. The three performed Beatles covers, Beatles-inspired interpretations of traditional folk rock tunes, and some original material. They call themselves the Jet Set after McGuinn's interest in aviation. The band's sound was a mashup of Beatles-influenced folk music and renditions of modern folk tunes. Dixon signed a one-time single agreement for the trio with Elektra Records in 1964 to capitalize on the British invasion frenzy. Their debut song, Please Let Me Love You, did not chart, although demos were subsequently included on compilation albums. The Byrds were founded in 1964 by bassist John Dixon, who bought an acetate recording of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man and decided to cover it with a rock band arrangement. Inspired by the Beatles' film A Hard Day's Night, the band chose to use instruments similar to the Fab Four. Dixon hired mandolinist Chris Hillman as the Jet Set's bassist in October 1964. On November 10, 1964, the quartet secured a recording contract with Columbia Records. 2 weeks later, at Tickner's house for Thanksgiving dinner, they agreed to brand themselves the Byrds. The Byrds' debut song, Mr. Tambourine Man, was recorded at Columbia Studios in Hollywood in January 1965. Instead of employing members of the band, producer Terry Melcher engaged a group of outstanding session players known as the Wrecking Crew. While they awaited the release of their debut song, the Byrds established a residency at Zero Light Disc nightclub on the Sunset Strip. In March 1965, Bob Dylan paid an unplanned visit to the club and joined them on stage for a song of Baby, What You Want Me to Do. The full electric rock treatment provided to the song by the Byrds and producer Terry Melcher essentially formed the framework for the musical subgenre of folk rock. The success of the record launched the folk rock boom of 1965 and 1966, during which other Byrds-influenced groups charted in the United States and the United Kingdom. On June 21, 1965, the Mr. Tambourine Man album was released, reaching number 6 on the Billboard Top LPs list and number 7 on the UK Albums chart. It included folk song reworkings such as Pete Seeger's musical version of Idris Davies' poetry, The Bells of Rimini. With their mop-top hairstyles and characteristic rectangular granny spectacles, the band radiated California cool while still looking sufficiently nonconformist. Derek Taylor, the group's publicist, planned the Byrds' 1965 English tour in part to capitalize on the success of the Mr. Tambourine Man song. The tour was overhyped from the outset, with the band being dubbed America's answer to the Beatles, a moniker the Byrds were unable to live up to. Poor sound, band illness, shabby musicianship, and a weak stage presence all conspired to alienate crowds and earn the band harsh criticism in the British press. The Byrds' cover of Turn, Turn, Turn was released on October 1, 1965, and it went on to become the band's second #1 hit in the United States, as well as the title track for their second album. Richie Unterberger, a music historian, describes it as folk rock's greatest potential grace note. As the Vietnam War intensified, the song's message of peace and tolerance struck a chord with the American record-buying audience. Turn, the Byrds' second album, was released in 1965 and reached number 17 in the United States and number 11 in the United Kingdom. It helped the band establish themselves as one of rock music's most influential creative forces, comparable to the Beach Boys, Beatles, and Rolling Stones. More of the band's songs were featured on this album than on the previous one, with Clark taking center stage as a songwriter. Critics consider the Byrds' 8 Miles High to be the first full-fledged psychedelic rock recording. The song was recorded at RCA Studios in Hollywood in December 1965, but Columbia Records refused to release it as a single. On January 24th and 25th of 1966, the group had to re-record the song at Columbia Studios in Los Angeles. McGuinn's lead guitar performance is notable, as the guitarist attempted to imitate John Coltrane's free-form jazz saxophone playing. Gene Clark quit the Byrds shortly after 8 Miles High was released in 1966. On a plane destined for New York, he had a panic attack and disembarked, refusing to board the plane. As a solo artist, Clark was signed to Columbia Records and went on to produce a critically lauded but commercially unsuccessful body of work. In 1967, the Byrds were working on the notorious Byrd Brothers when tensions within the band began to rise. Michael Clark left the band due to disagreements with his bandmates and dissatisfaction with the songwriting of other songwriters. It was released in January 1968 and saw the band pushing their psychedelic experimentation to new heights. The album was only moderately successful commercially, peaking at number 47 in the United States. Crosby left shortly after, and he received a cash settlement and used it to buy a sailboat before joining the successful supergroup Crosby, Stills, and Nash with Stephen Stills and Graham Nash. He battled crippling drug addiction in the 1980s and eventually served a year in prison on drug-related charges. The Sweetheart of the Rodeo album was the first country rock album released by a major American rock band, and the first to be widely labeled as such. The Byrds' departure from psychedelia alienated a large portion of their countercultural fan base while inciting hostility from Nashville's country music establishment. It is now regarded as a blueprint for the entire 1970s country rock movement and outlaw country scene. Dr. Byrds and Mr. Hyde was released on March 5, 1969 to generally positive reviews, but it became the Byrds' lowest charting album in America. The album fared much better in the United Kingdom, where it received rave reviews and peaked at number 15. The title track was the album's first single, and it peaked at number 65 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. The Byrds released a 2-record album on September 14, 1970 to positive reviews and strong sales. It reached number 40 on the Billboard Top LPs chart and number 11 in the United Kingdom. The live half of the show featured both new material and new renditions of previous hit singles, such as Mr. Tambourine Man and So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. The Byrd Maniacs album was released on June 23, 1971 and received mixed reviews from critics. Due to the group's busy touring schedule, much of the material recorded for the album was unfinished. Arranger Paul Polino was controversially brought in to help with the overdubbing of strings, horns, and a gospel choir onto many of the Byrds songs, allegedly without the band's consent. Columbia Records refused to remaster the album due to budget constraints, so it was pressed and released. Gene Parsons left the band in 1972, and even though they have no relation, Graham Parsons was in the band in 1968, and even though he was in it for a brief time, he later made a name for himself with the Flying Burrito Brothers, and most people remember him because of how he died in 1973. So rest in peace to him. And some people didn't even know he was in the Byrds for a little under a year, a little over a year. He was in there 1968. But let's continue with the Byrds' history. Gene Parsons was replaced by John Guerin. Guerin was never an official member of the band and was instead paid as a session musician. Only 2 official Byrds recordings are featuring the McGuinn, White, Baden, and Guerin lineup. The other 2 recordings were made for Earl Scruggs' film Banjo Man's soundtrack. McGuinn fired Byrd bassist Skip Baden after a February 10, 1973 show in New York. McGuinn approached Chris Hillman, a member of the band Manassas at the time, and asked him to fill in for Baden. On February 24, 1973, after a shambolic, under-rehearsed performance at the Capitol Theater in New Jersey, McGuinn canceled the band's remaining concert commitments and disbanded the touring version of the Byrds. The Byrds' original 5 members reunited briefly in late 1972. Conversations about a reunion between Roger McGuinn, Gene Clark, David Crosby, Chris Hillman, and Michael Clark began in July 1971. The original Byrds recorded their first album together in 7 years at Wally Heider Studios in Los Angeles from October 16th to November 15th of 1972. Simply Byrds, the Byrds reunion album was released on March 7th, 1973 to mixed reviews. The album peaked at number 20 on the Billboard Top LPs and Tapes chart, and number 31 in the United Kingdom. Crosby persuaded McGuinn to dissolve the Columbia version of the Byrds after the album was completed. In keeping with the new spirit of reunion fostered by the reunion, of course, McGuinn permanently disbanded the group's Columbia lineup in February 1973. Following the Byrds' reunion in 1972 and 1973, Roger McGuinn's acclaimed solo album marked the end of the band's career. In the years since its release, all 5 members of the band have been openly critical of the album, with the consensus being that the material on it is weak and that the recording sessions were rushed and ill thought out. The band lost faith in the idea of an ongoing series of reunions as a result of the band's negative critical reception in the music press. Gene Clark approached McGuinn, Crosby, and Hillman about reforming the Byrds to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the release of Mr. Tambourine Man. Because none of the original members were interested, Clark gathered a group of musicians and friends under the banner of the 20th anniversary tribute to the Byrds. McGuinn slammed the tribute act as a cheap show in interviews, prompting McGuinn to slam the tribute group. Clark returned to his solo career after the tour ended in late 1985, leaving Michael Clark to continue with the band. Michael Clark's Byrds tribute group, the Byrds featuring Michael Clark, reunited McGuinn, Crosby, and Hillman for an onstage reunion at a Los Angeles concert in June 1988. According to author Johnny Rogan, most die-hard Byrds fans were mortified by the existence of this doppelganger version of the band. Michael Clark also attempted to register the name The Byrds as a trademark for his use. The Byrds' original members put aside their differences to perform together at their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1991. During the 1970s, McGuinn attempted to trademark the band's name to prevent it from being misused, but his application was denied. Due to lingering resentment from his earlier 20th anniversary tribute appearance, Gene Clark was not invited to participate in these official Byrds reunion concerts. The ceremony marked the first time since 1973 that all 5 original Byrds stood together. Unfortunately, it would be the last time the original members would be reunited, as Gene Clark and Michael Clark died before the end of the 1990s. The Byrds last performed in 2000 at a tribute concert. McGuinn, Crosby, and Hillman were scheduled to appear separately, but McGuinn appeared unexpectedly and joined his former partners on stage. According to recent press reports, the reunion was a resounding success. The audience showered the band with standing ovations and chanted for more as they exited the stage. Following Clark's death, David Crosby purchased the rights to the band's name. McGuinn and bassist Richie Hillman reunited for a series of concerts in 2018 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of their album Sweetheart of the Rodeo. And that's what happened to the Byrds. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know, do you think the Byrds will ever reunite again with the 3 original members? I'd say probably not. I'd say there's a 95% chance that it will never happen again. We'll never see those 3 members on stage together again, even if just for one time. I would be surprised, but let me know, what do you think? Give me some of your favorite Byrd songs. Here are some of mine on screen. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.